So, I've got one mistake, I think, maybe-ish, and then a bunch of fixes. So that's good. I'm going to start with the Moriarty Vest by a lovely French woman whose name I really should have written down because I have now forgotten it. I don't think I'm going to do it. It should have ribbing on the sides. I kind of like the sort of 1990s J. Crew thing I'm getting without the ribbing. We'll see. I should wear it to find out, but it's hot, so that's not a thing that's going to happen. But really I want to talk about the yarn, because the yarn is bonkers. I still love it, but it's a little bonkers. So I have shown you, if you have seen that episode, I have shown you how incredibly, it's like elastic. It's a little bit bonkers. Now, at the end of summer, I got a somewhat surprising deal on a, what are they called? Swift, on a Swift. And so I wound up a bunch of yarn before I left on that Swift. And when I was winding this stuff, I was trying to be really careful, because if I had wound it and pulled, I felt like it was going to stretch out the yarn in the elastic form, and it could be problematic. So I would pull a bunch out and then wind it, and then pull a bunch out and then wind it. I wind everything by hand on a thing, it's actually one of those silicone basting tools, but you know, never mind. It does the job, and it is convenient for basting if I ever need to do that as well. So I wound it, and I knit basically the top, like basically to here. I knit the back and the two fronts, and I switched balls shortly thereafter. Or I switched balls just before finishing the top, I guess whatever left side, whatever side is the last side. The second ball I wound here, and I wound with it around my knees, right? I just put the hank around the knees, and I unwind them, and I wind it up. And it was a totally different yarn, like completely different. My gauge changed actually a little. I'm looking at this and I thought it didn't, but you're not going to notice after blocking. But I bet if I measured it, I'd be like half a stitch to a stitch difference. Maybe. I don't know. I should measure that and find out. That would be the smart thing to do. If I do, I'll put it in the thingy. Because... yeah, and it felt really different. It felt not as pleasing. Possibly because the other thing about this yarn is that it's really a different fabric, even with a slight gauge change. So trying it on 4s, 5s, and 6s, because even though it's a fingering weight, you could argue for it being a sport weight. You could argue for knitting in a DK. I probably could have tested it more, but the fabric that I got on 4s and 5s and 6s, totally different fabric. And the stitches per inch were really not that different, which was strange. Again, if I were smart, I would have my numbers, but it was something, it was really different. It was not very different in terms of gauge, but it was hugely different in terms of the fabric and the look of the fabric. And I only liked it on 4s, which for everyone else would probably be 3s? No, that can't be right. Did I do this on 4s? No, I did this on 5s. What am I saying? What am I saying? Ignore me. I did it on 5s, which would be the equivalent to 4s for most people, because I tend to go up a needle size from your average knitter, or from your average pattern writer. Anyway, not only did it look different and feel different, but there was something odd in that it seemed it was only the right fabric at one gauge. I don't know how to better explain that, but it was like, it has to be. I looked at the swatches and it had to be at that gauge. It was the only way the fabric made any sense to me. Is that me? Is that the yarn? I don't know. If you've used this yarn and you understand what the heck I'm talking about, give a comment. Tell me I'm not crazy. Tell other people I'm not crazy. I'm less concerned about that second one, but still, it's nice to know. I don't know. So I went with the needles I went with. I'm very, very happy with the fabric this turned out. It's been kind of sitting over a chair because I just need to weave in the ends. But it's just too hot even. It's just too hot. Even when a cold front, it was too hot to wear. So, or it was too cold and I needed like actual sleeves. I don't know. I love it. I love the fabric. Oh, when I skeined the third ball, so after the second one, when it felt like I was knitting with a different yarn, it felt like I was knitting and it didn't want to be that dense of a gauge. When I skeined the third ball, of which there is much left, by the way, I kept it taut around my knees so that I was, in fact, stretching it out a little bit. And it went back to knitting like the original, like the first one. I, at some point, subsequently ran across, I don't know what I was looking for, I don't know what I was doing, but I don't know what I was doing, but I ran across a reference to special care instructions. See the Brooklyn Tweed website. So I went and I looked, and it did in fact have special instructions, which I believe were don't wind it tightly. So I think the intention of the mill of the brand is to have you knit it in the slightly thicker version, where it's, you know, whatever. I've kept my swatches, and I am going to, I want to keep a look at them, and I want to measure them, like, you know, a couple weeks from now, because I have a feeling that it just kind of keeps changing. And so if you are going to use this yarn, maybe don't rush the swatching, especially if it's for a garment where you really care about the dimensions. Mistakes on this one were, really there was only one big one. I was binding off, and I went with tubular, and I don't really know why, because I do like a more finished edge on a neckline than the tubular provides. The tubular is beautiful, but it's a softer edge, and I like a harder edge, I think. So I started the tubular, decided I didn't like it, went to pull it out, and which is a pain under normal circumstances, but I immediately broke the yarn. So that was partly me in, you know, I probably wasn't paying quite enough attention. You know how it's done, you know how Kitchener goes, you should be pulling in the opposite direction. I don't always pay as much attention as I should to these things, so it's probably my fault. Although I vaguely remember having heard that this yarn can split. It doesn't matter because it's non-superwash wool, so you spit splice it back together, and it's like it never happened. It's not a big deal, but it freaked me out when it first happened. I was like, oh crap, because I really, really didn't want to as I'm unpicking the Kitchener, which is the end of the tubular, well, I was just doing the Italian, I suppose, because there wasn't the tube, there was just the Kitchener bind off, or the Kitchener, yeah. So I was, you know, paranoid of breaking one of the loops and having to rip back and redo it, which, I mean, I had plenty of yarn, it wouldn't have been a big deal, but for some reason I just really didn't want it to happen. So mildly stressful, not actually a big deal looking back on it. And that was it. The only modification I made is I did a little bit of waist shaping in the back. I believe that's the Amy Herzog trick. No waist shaping in the front, but a little bit along two seams in the back. And it actually, I don't know if you can see it. You probably can't. But it looks like a very gentle so, not unhappy about that. Again, I really do love this yarn. It's very similar to a Rowan. If feel-wise, it's very different, but visually it's very similar to one of the Rowan tweeds, not the felted tweed, but it could be a discontinued one because I got it on like super clearance at Webb's. But the sweater I made my Aldous out of, whatever that is, they're very similar aesthetically and a little bit similar in hand feel. Actually very similar in hand feel. So it's a potentially cheaper option because this is not the cheapest of yarns. Do I think it's worth it? Yeah, I probably do. Honestly, I probably do. There is something really glorious about it. I do prefer it. At the gauge I was at, I prefer it if it was pulled a little bit out, because when it was not, it was harder to work with. It was less pleasant to work with. It didn't want to cooperate with me. There was that little bit of resistance. But otherwise, highly recommended. And highly recommend the pattern too. It was beautifully written. And it seems to be very well sized. Like it looks proportionately correct on everybody, which is always nice to see. So, highly recommend it on both fronts. Now is this a mistake? Here's the thing about what I'm about to show you. I can't decide if this is a mistake. This thing is messing with my head like you would not believe. So, I cast on the Boxy by Joji Locatelli, which was a huge pattern, you know, a while ago. It's no longer so, it's still huge, but it's not as popular now. Obviously, these things go in phases, but it was one of those ones that's like, everyone was like, it looks good on everybody, it's just a great wardrobe staple. So I bought a bunch of black yarn because that's the kind of wardrobe staple that it made sense to me. Anyway, and I had found some Happy sock yarn, Happy Feet sock yarn that is, I think it's discontinued now, but I used it for socks and it made me happy, so I went for it. Now, with this pattern, the dimensions are written down. You know how big it is. It's big. And when you look on the model photos, it's a drop shoulder, and the drop shoulder comes to your frickin' elbow. So you know there's going to be a lot of ease. Yet I still could not wrap my brain around it until it was actually, you know, a thing. Because is this even, like, I feel like it's probably not even in frame. This thing is huge. It's gargantuous. I knew it was going to be gargantuous. The dimensions were written down, but I clearly didn't understand how gargantuous it was going to be. I also think the thing I didn't account for, because lots of people in their notes knit it longer. And they were not exceedingly tall people. So people were very, very awesome. And if you do this, you are awesome, and I thank you. Who put their height and then how much they added. Which is really handy because you have an approximation of body size and you have an approximation of height. So you can say, oh, that person's roughly my size. I like where it's hitting on them, or I can adjust, you know, based on that. Because with this much ease, if it's not going this way, it's going this way. It's going down, right? So I was using another drop shoulder sweater, but a normal drop shoulder sweater to compare. I knitted slightly longer than that because I wanted it slightly longer than that. And this is a lot longer than so I don't know. But I kind of like it. Like it weighs. It's so heavy, and this is such a light gauge that's kind of mystifying. But it's like a weighted blanket situation. It feels like, well, not actually, but there's an element of weighted blanketness going on here. It feels cozy. It feels like I'm really gonna like this. Will I like it? I don't know. I don't know. Should I reknit it smaller so I still have the ease but not quite so much of it? I honestly don't know. I don't know. I'll put it on. Should I finish it and then decide? That's another question. That's an avail. I mean, because look at this. This thing is it's actually past. It's a little bit past my elbows. And I haven't started the sleeves yet. Just if you haven't seen the pattern, this is just the drop shoulder part, right? So I don't know. I don't know if this is a mistake or if this is the way it's supposed to be. The length is a little bit long. I have the option because I had knit somebody a pair of socks in this yarn. So I have the option, somewhere in here, there is about 2 inches, 2.5 inches from the bottom is where I joined a new skein. So I have the option of treating that like a thing and picking out, detaching the bottom and then just doing the ribbing. So I have a very easy option for shortening it. I don't know if I want to. I don't have a full-length mirror. That's a bit of a problem. So I really should use this and take some video and turn around and move in it and see what I think. I might knit the shoulders, knit the sleeves and do it, because the sleeves are only like this long. They're tiny little things, so it'll take like an hour, like a couple hours. So I honestly cannot decide if this is a mistake or not. I do know that there is a mistake that you may or not be able to see. Actually, two mistakes, because I tend to just substitute wrap and turn. I use GSR instead of wrap and turn. I prefer GSR. I think it's seamless, it's invisible. I like the way it looks. I like the way you work it. Wrap and turn is fiddly. You got to find the loop, and you have to be paying attention to find the loop, whereas you can't not notice you're knitting into a double stitch on GSRs, even if you're not looking when you're knitting. So I like to not look when I knit. That way it works for me. So I just swapped them out. And did not read that you're not supposed to pick up the wraps. I'm assuming it's because it's in garter, and therefore you want actually there to be a little bit extra. The thing will fill the hole enough, is my guess. She knows what she's doing, so I do trust her. I just didn't read. I looked at, okay, do wrap and turn, and I just mentally swapped it out, did GSR, and then got to the next line or whatever, and I was like, oh. And then I ignored it and kept doing GSR anyway, because it wasn't important enough for me to go back and fix it, or change it. So it does work. I also did, what did I do? There was one other thing I did. Can't remember. It's been too long. There was one other mistake that caused it to be slightly out of pattern. What would I have done to have it cause... This is the problem. Maybe I should go back and watch the first recording. I deleted the first recording. You can't do that. So I made a mistake up here. It looks fine to me. You can't tell. Unless I didn't bother changing it. Because I didn't even notice it was a mistake until at some point I realized that it must be a mistake. But you can't tell. So, I don't know. Is this a mistake? Is this supposed to be this big? It is supposed to be this big. It is the correct measurements. I did a swatch. My swatch was correct. I washed and blocked it. It came out right. This is what it's supposed to look like. I just don't know if I like what it's supposed to look like. And that happens sometimes, especially when it's something that is something you've never really done before. You can't, how do you, actually no, I did, because I remember I had that white sweater that I've since knit something to replace it, and therefore don't have it anymore. I remember when I did the measurements on that, it was 60 inches around. And I didn't quite like that. So that's good to know. Maybe that changes my mind about this. Oh, and when I was picking up, this is dumb, and now I have to rip back the neckline to fix this. I could double stitch over it, but I'd rather just get it right. I think maybe I'll double stitch it and see how it looks. But it's right at the neckline, so it's like people are looking there. I don't know how I did that. I picked up in a weird spot, and I got a line across. I'm assuming I just picked up into the wrong part of the stitch, which is weird because, the rest of it is exactly the way it should be. I don't know. I do like the yarn though. I don't love it as much as I thought I did because it picks up, it's black. It picks up stuff. So I think if I had something that was a little bit, I think it was a yarn that was slightly less tightly spun. Like this is a reasonably tightly spun. Why am I holding this up to you? I have no idea. You're not going to see this. But it's got a reasonable tight ply on there. So, and you can tell with the, you know, when you get the slightly, no longer a perfect V, but a slight twist on one of them, which I don't care about. That is not a problem for me. But I think the combination of the black color and that, who knows? I'm shutting up now because I've stopped making sense. So we'll see. We'll see if I finish it and wear it, or if I finish it and don't. A lot of this is kind of a moot point because, again, I'm in a warm climate, so I can't just wear it out and then find out because I'll fall over from heat exhaustion. So this is the downside of knitting in heat. What do you do? I don't know. I got no answer. Waiting for the bus to go by.